So
just by typing it in.
I'm going to interrupt us because we said we shouldn't go for an hour and 45 minutes and we're talking about politics for like a solid 20 minutes. So,
well, I mean, it's technically a bar of your shit if you want to go first.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Right.
It's a good tie-in.
Okay. Me.
Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
You almost fucked it up. That was good. You almost fucked it up there.
Almost.
Pickle dick, ugly prick. Pickle dick, ugly prick.
I like that one better. That one's actually really good.
Yeah, we should teach that one to Evan.
A little bit of that pressure.
All right. Clink, clank.
Clink, clank. Clink.
Clank,
Clink,
clank.
clank.
Clank, clink, clank. Hello and welcome to Strange Happy Hour Quarantine Edition. I am one of your hosts, Brent The Jesterhead Metcalfe. Along to my right, it's Handsome John.
No, it's not. You're pointing at Mark.
I'm pointing right now at the Monokuma, actually on my right.
And whenever this is whenever whatever they're seeing
It's
right now,
supposed to be you,
it is
Buffalo.
definitely going to
Looking
be
over
on
here. What's up,
Brent's
everybody?
right.
And then on my left,
The
in the
dispatcher,
ditto-
Mark Plover.
the Ditlax that I have, it's a Ditto Snorlax on my chair over there. See, I actually have these perfectly
oh my God, that was not
aligned
where I thought that was going.
so that everyone can see that I have my two co-hosts next to me. As you can tell, we are not recording in our normal spot, of course, except for the dispatcher himself, because
actually,
where
for what they're seeing, we're recording in normal spots. It's just a little
well,
weird
you
looking.
can see that there's a little bit of weird vibe here. That's because we are, of course, trying to keep our health in mind. My wife is someone who is immunocompromised, so of course that means I have to stay away from everyone. John works every day traveling around the entire city of Charlotte, which means he's a filthy, filthy man. And Mark lives on the
That's
set.
true.
I've been living
They
the-
literally told me not 10 feet.
I've been living the hermit life for a little while, so
So we're going to attempt to make this work. Please enjoy the growing pains as we move on. But we couldn't not do a podcast this week because some major news hit, of course. Now, this isn't the news including the fact that, we have... Sorry, I have a document over here. Discord upping live stream limits because of the coronavirus. We, of course, can't talk about the fact that the Prince of Persia is coming back to For Honor. Weird way to tie that back in. And we also can't talk about the fact that there's a new Tony Hawk game that has leaked. But we do have time to talk about, honestly, the two biggest news stories of this week. The stories we like to call ourselves this on the very show you are watching. What we like to call... This is gonna be really
important
interesting. The important
I knew the D-Sync was
do
gonna.
that. It worked out so well, and then you opened your mouth again.
I knew the D-Sync was gonna fuck with us, or Brent was gonna fuck with us. One or the other.
I don't know if you folks can
Why
tell,
wouldn't
but
you
there's
at
a
least
small
try to have a
sync
good one
problem
on the
as we're trying to make
quarantine
this
edition,
happen
okay?
on the quarantine edition. Our first story of
Part
the
one.
week is
Because I
the
guarantee you it's not going to be the only one.
largest story that has happened, which is we now have a final comparison between PlayStation 5 and Xbox One X, or Series X specs. So this past Wednesday, Mark Cerny got onto a live stream for PlayStation and discussed with us the actual specifications of the platform, broke it down in some very nerdy shit that the dispatcher and I enjoyed. I think Handsome John did as well, but probably not what everyone else was expecting. But I think we're here to compare the two.
I might not be totally on the news, but I'm never. Okay.
Nobody said you
I
were.
understand the numbers. I know. What
Probably
the
shouldn't use that word anymore because apparently it's not a good word.
Not socially acceptable.
Why?
Retarded.
I was describing myself.
Typically doesn't matter. It's just like if you're like I'm a but you're not actually gay, that's not a good thing.
Man, he's gonna have a hard time with the bleeping on this.
Anyways,
we just bleep everything.
I apologize if I offend anybody.
Sorry, I had to bump John up to a 4 on that one.
There you go. few drinks, but we're going to sit here and discuss. We have the specs for both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. Now, what's interesting here is that the specs obviously don't align. I think we're going to go through them as best as we can. I actually have a little comparison chart here via IGN. You can find that in the description, floating above Mark like a cloud of despair because he's so lonely. But I will talk about this point by point, and we will go over it together. So, of course, the RAM... Okay. So we'll start with the RAM, which is the same. So I think we could actually move on to the next part, which would be the memory bandwidth, Mark. So you are a tech guru of the show, which means that you're going to be speaking a lot, and we're going to be asking you a lot of questions.
Wonderful.
So I can tell right here that the difference between the two appears to be 3.8 gigahertz to 3.5. What does that mean?
You dropped down to CPU.
I did. You're right. I totally meant the memory bandwidth, which is 448 gigabytes per second compared to 10 gigabytes at 560 gigabytes per second.
Yep. So memory bandwidth between the two of them is kind of an interesting point. So as far as the amount of frames that you're actually gaining from this, because of the architecture that Sony and Microsoft both use, where the RAM is shared between the CPU and the GPU together, which is why the RAM, whenever you look at the spec for the RAM itself, is 16 gigabytes of GDDR6. That's graphics RAM, usually, with the G in front of it like that.
Okay.
So it's kind of an interesting point to see here that Sony's gone for a flat 448. But Microsoft has an accelerated 10 gigabytes at 560 gigabytes a second, and a lower 6 gigabytes at 335 gigabytes a second, which makes sense if you're trying to, like, I guess, give them access to certain amount of RAM if they want to have, like, high-speed read things as opposed to low-speed read things. Like, whereas Sony just says, this is all you get. Now, it does make the programming for Microsoft stuff a little bit more complicated because maybe you have to tell it what memory bank you want to use. But the benefit that comes out of it is if you have quick read things like textures, for example, that need to load faster than other things, then that 560 gigabytes a second will come in handy for something. Like, for example, the textures for a mailbox on, I know this is a Sony only thing, but like an open world game like Spider-Man, for example, the textures for a mailbox that have to be reused over and over and over again because they're all over the place and maybe need to load very quickly, that might be a beneficial use there. Versus the 6 gigabyte a second, or I'm sorry, 6 gigabytes at 335 gigabytes a second would actually be more beneficial at like textures, which would have already been loaded in or run through the GPU at the time.
Okay. I think this is really interesting because it sounds to me like Microsoft's allowing a lot of variability, but it does require the devs themselves to have to kind of hard code that. Maybe not hard code, but specify, right? Whereas Sony is trying to make it much more specific and generalized of like, here's your access, here's what you have, and everyone can kind of utilize it.
Right, and realistically, that single memory speed of 448 gigabytes a second for the PlayStation 5, that's what you're used to programming with anyway, which is where you get a lot of your backwards compatibility there, too, because the problem with backwards compatibility on the Xbox Series X there is, well, you've got two different speed memory options there, so which one do you use? I'm not sure what you're doing.
Don't worry about it. That's for the consumer.
Of course. So... Did the Xbox Series X, because I don't remember this, did they talk about backwards compatibility?
So the Xbox Series X will actually be the first, well, technically
no, there it is. It's on the chart here, actually.
Yeah.
Xbox,
It's
original, 360, One, and accessories.
Correct. So Xbox plan for backwards compatibility is that they're going all the way for as many games as they can. So for the original Xbox, there are a certain number of games that are backwards compatible because they didn't really have a digital library at the time. There's not a whole lot they can do about licensing and a couple other things. But for 360 going forward, anything that was digital can be played on your Xbox Series X. Now, we don't know about hardware like standards here, like because the Xbox One X and the Xbox One can play Xbox 360 games. Not sure if the Series X will allow that from a disc. It also sounds like somebody's dying on your end, Mark.
That would be our new roommate's cat.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yep, there you go.
I will also warn all of our lovely viewers that I do have two dogs that very well may bark. or make an appearance on the show.
And
I might bring
apparently I have a
Einstein because
cat
he's
that's-
just a cute fluff.
Apparently, I have a cat that's loud enough that's going to be,
Yeah.
making noise here. So
That's true. That's true.
it
Moving
in
on
heat?
to... I'm sorry, what did you say, John?
Was the cat in heat?
It's a cat in heat, if you know what I mean.
I
We
don't
call
think
that a pussy
he can go into
cat.
heat. So I think that's fine.
It's called a pussy cat. CPU, and honestly, Mark, we're going to try and move through these relatively quickly only because we have a much larger discussion at the end of this.
Yep.
So we've got the Zen 2 cores at 3.5 gigahertz for PS5 compared to the Zen 2 cores at 3.8 gigahertz for Xbox Series X with 3.6 gigahertz with SMT. Talk to me, Goose.
So I don't know what SMT is. I never quite figured that out. I tried searching around a couple places. I couldn't find that one.
Standard military time, I think, is what it stands for.
Totally. So I would imagine 3.6 gigahertz is going to be the throttle point for Xbox, the Xbox Series X here, or is going to be like the standard clock speed that it tries to run at. 3.8 is going to be its peak, so if it's within temperature ranges and needs the power for it, it may bump up to 3.8 to get you the extra couple of frames that you would need. Or, honestly, it may give the developers control over to say, I only need this much processing power, so just reduce the amount of power anyway so that I can get better cooling.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that's going to be a little bit more variable there, although... Sony did specifically tout that they were going to have variable clock speeds and variable power consumption by the processor.
Correct, yeah. And they also talked about having a much, a very specific cooling system that Mark Cerny, the architect of PS4, PS5, and basically what Sony does, was very excited about. So when that nerd gets excited about some nerdy stuff...
So I'm intrigued, though, because he got into it, but he was talking about the fact that they were going to modulate the hardware based on the cooling performance.
Okay.
And I personally don't like that sentiment because that means you're relying on how well you can cool something in when we haven't seen the official shape yet still.
Correct.
So the problem is if it's going to be a horizontal set-top box like every other PlayStation has been, why would we think it's going to be different? If it's going to be a horizontal set-top box, cooling performance on those is generally terrible. The problem is that you have one tiny fan that sits at the back and has to disperse its air across the entire surface, and you hope that gets it clean or gets it cooled. But the problem is that that's not always effective unless you have a ton of fans across the back, like you would with, let's say, a rack server or something like that big companies use. This is where I praise Microsoft because they have one fan at the top that covers the entire surface of the top, essentially, and flushes air in through the sides and straight up out the top like it's an exhaust vent.
So I agree with what you're describing. Yeah. But I will say again, when a nerd like Mark Cerny gets excited about cooling, there has to be something interesting there, right?
It was what he was saying that was more annoying. I don't want to say annoying, but was more disconcerting.
No. Say your true feelings, Mark. It was annoying.
It was more annoying that the way that he said it sounded so exciting. It's like, oh, well, we're going to restrict the hardware based on the way that the cooling performance is. Well, that's great. That means you're downscaling the way that you should, like any other hardware device should. But the problem that comes on the other side of that is, does that mean you have to do limiting every time there's something that heavy that runs in there? I mean, don't get me wrong. 7-nanometer architectures from AMD are very efficient when it comes to their power usage and their cooling. But the problem that I have with that idea that, we're designing the hardware, limiting based on the cooling. Well, that's... I feel like you should design the cooling around what your performance capabilities are.
Okay.
That's really the better way to do it. And I think that's where Microsoft's going to win out on this one, is that they maybe get better consistent results at 3.8 gigahertz, as opposed to PlayStation having to downscale themselves to 3.2 or 3.0 gigahertz, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Instead of being able to maintain the 3.6 or 3.5. The entire time.
So there's an interesting point I'm going to bring up at the end of this because I've watched a lot, but I do want to get through the tech specs as fast as possible. So we got the GPU, which is a custom AMD Radeon RDNA Navi for the PlayStation 5 and for Xbox One or Series X, but 10.28 teraflops on the actual PlayStation 5 with only 36 GPUs at 2.23 gigahertz, whereas the Xbox Series X has 12 teraflops, 52 CPUs at 1.82 gigahertz. So before we get into the super nerdy detail that you will dive into there, Marcus, what is the difference between 2.23 gigahertz and 1.825? Because while it sounds like Xbox has more CUs, it also sounds like they're not operating nearly at the same level. Am I wrong? Talk to me.
So I love how you said, before we get into the super nerdy stuff, here's the super nerdy stuff. So this is a major contention point for me. So typically in graphics processors, whenever it comes to like NVIDIA and that kind of thing, it's a high core count at a very low clock speed per core.
Okay.
And that's the idea. The reason is that you can push a lot more pixels in a parallel fashion at the same time, through a processor at once, and then reassemble it on the other side and then display the frame. And that happens obviously 60 to 200 times a second. And then everything else that has to go with it too, as far as like ray tracing or 3D audio or whatever else you've got, going on that would run through the graphics card. So the contention point here for me is that I'm thinking that Microsoft is going to win out here.
Okay.
The reason I think that is because they have a higher core count at a slightly lower clock speed. The difference between 1.8 and 2.2 in the graphics world is a big deal, but the difference is that the higher core count means that you can actually, in the same time frame, in the same number of milliseconds, process more pixels at once. Now granted,
okay,
that comes with that teraflop number, but it's something that you're going to have to keep in mind there is that a higher core count can be used for more pixels at once, as opposed to a higher clock speed over a fewer number of cores means that you could do more intensive calculations in a high core count scenario like that. Like if you're using it for, for example, the Tempest engine, that might help in that scenario using ray tracing if you're trying to use other things like echo simulation and whatever else, or audio manipulation over distances or something like that. That might come in more in handy if it's going to be left up to the graphics card to do. But it's really going to come down to the developer of how well they use it.
Okay.
As far as pushing pixels, higher core count, lower clock speed usually comes out more on top there. Which is why your graphics card is built completely differently from your CPU. And your CPU is generally not as good at pushing pixels as your graphics card is.
So I want to keep this idea of not necessarily afloat, but I want to come back to this because there's something I do want to talk about in detail once we get through the rest of the tech specs. But
Sure.
That's good to know. Thank you very much. The final piece of the tech specs really is the fact that they're using a custom SSD that's only 825 gigs for the PlayStation 5 and 1 terabyte NVMe SSD for the Xbox One X. I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory until we get to the point that I actually want to talk about this custom SSD, because from my understanding, and I have done very cursory research. Mark knows my technology knowledge fairly well. I think John does also understand that I am not a tech guru, hence why we rely on Mark to help us set up this quarantine edition from afar for recording this episode. But I have heard through various Twitter feeds, and I could probably pull one up actually on my phone, that people are clamoring, and I'm telling incredibly excited about the fact that Sony's custom SSD is so fast that even though they're behind on the CUs, the teraflops, and the actual what you call it not refresh rate, but the actual gigahertz, clock speed, that it is actually a more powerful machine because of that. So Mark Cerny did talk about the fact that they actually allocated 6 what do you call it, security levels? Am I wrong? for a hard drive, there are processing levels or security levels. I'm really blanking
I would
hard
say
drive.
processing levels. Yeah, there's
Okay,
there's
yeah.
the storage controller. There's 6 processing levels. One of them is a security level, which is the encryption chip you're talking about.
And so they're touting for 6 on this custom SSD, and the fact that I've seen multiple developers say, listen, you watched this nerdy video, you don't understand it. I'm telling you right now, this is the most impressive piece of technology I've ever seen. It's fascinating to me, but Mark, I understand that you are not nearly as impressed by this.
Complete opposite, actually. I'm not impressed with the cooling. That was the only piece I wasn't actually impressed with. Actually,
Okay.
So I put their storage standards up here with it being a custom SSD up there with Apple, actually. So this is going to be a custom 825 gigabyte SSD, which 1 is a very specific number, and 2, meaning custom, generally means that it's soldered. So 1, you're not going to be able to use you're not going to be able to move your stuff out of this. So by the way, just something to keep in mind in this, just off of the assumption that it's soldered, even though we don't have the information for that.
So it's not, because Mark Cerny confirmed that we can replace that SSD with other SSDs, but they have to be specified by PlayStation. Because
that was for the extra.
No. This is for the traditional, this is for what they have in the machine. So he was stating that with what they have in the machine, that it was, at the time of the Wired article that released in 2019, it was the most performance-intensive SSD ever created. You can replace it with the newer ones. They just want to make sure that you don't go out and buy one now.
Interesting.
That was my understanding. I could be wrong.
Well, so I'm going to look something up, actually, for just to keep in mind for all of this. They use all of these systems are using PCI Express 4.0, which is what modern NVMe storage is based on. M.2 is a PCI Express type of interface. They're all using PCI Express 4.0, which is touting... I was trying to see... I'm trying to see what the throughput is on PCI Express 4.0, but it doesn't seem to want to really give that to me from a bits per second perspective, so I'm not quite sure. Anyway,
so what?
I mean, Microsoft's is not interchangeable at all either, though, right?
It is.
So as far as we understand, it's not interchangeable. They're adding the ability to add expanded storage outside of it.
Not quite.
Which is proprietary.
Well, so theirs specifically says a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD storage drive.
Correct, but they're actually, and John's right, they're marketing a proprietary add-on storage for this.
So that's the first primary external storage option. It's a proprietary storage thing that you plug in, which is an NVMe SSD, just with its own proprietary interface that you plug into the slot on the back. Then they've also got a USB 3.2 connection on the back to expand further from there if you really need it.
But you couldn't actually replace the hard drive on the actual machine. At least that's what it sounds like to me. Because why would you include proprietary expansion on top of the fact that you can add an added...
So that's where I'm thinking that PlayStation's going to have a soldered primary chip, have an NVMe slot to add extra storage, and then be able to do USB external storage on top of that. So the reason is that
I agree
the way that Microsoft,
I think Xbox is the only one that has like their specific formed for memory.
Yeah.
Well, for the external drive or for the proprietary like add-on storage, yes. So like the reason I say that is the way that they word this in here is it says custom 825 gigabyte SSD storage drive, and that's it for PlayStation. If I remember right, they didn't say specifically that it was removable or non-removable.
That is true. We actually don't know. I will rescind my comment. I assume that it's removable only because the PS4 has removable, but you are correct in the sense that they're trying to build something custom here, so it would make more sense for it to not be.
Well, so the other side of this is that the storage speed, which comes out which comes out as well with this, the data transfer speed for Microsoft is 2.4 gigahertz, 2.4 gigabytes per second, with what they're advertising as a quote 1 terabyte NVMe SSD storage drive. So with that, it tells me that Microsoft is using an actual NVMe storage drive, like a standard chip one that you would screw in and is interchangeable.
Yeah.
And that's what that tells me. Now, a custom 825 gigabyte SSD storage drive is a very specific number, but what that tells me, though, is they may be doing some onboard RAID to get you the 5.5 gigabytes a second. Now,
well, I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
The information to keep in mind there too is that the Kraken chip that we had talked about for the encryption, or for the onboard encryption, that has a limit of 5 gigabytes a second anyway. So if you have your stuff compressed, I'm sorry, not encryption, compressed. If you have compressed storage anyway, that limits you to 5 gigabytes a second. Granted, it's only a 500 megabyte a second difference. It's not a huge deal, but that is something to keep in mind.
So I'm actually curious about this because I had read something similar, but they are touting 5.5. Like they're hard on that number. Well, so is it possible they're adapting that encryption and developing their own based off of it?
Well, so the funny part is that technically yes. So 5.5 gigabytes a second may be the throughput of the hard disk. Mm-hmm. And the RAID setup that they probably have in this hard disk, or the custom NVMe setup that they have in this hard disk. Mm-hmm. And 8 to 9 gigabytes a second of the compressed data would probably be correct as the uncompressed version of whatever you're shoveling through there at the time frame. Like, those are marketing numbers. Like, that's what it sounds like. But what they're not going to put side by side with that is the fact that 5 gigabytes a second. Now, they don't tell you whether that it's the uncompressed or compressed number there. That the 5 gigabytes a second of Kraken is the throughput there. So if you're using the Kraken throughput compression, Kraken compression, which, by the way, 5 gigabytes a second for compression, like live on the fly, compression and decompression is fantastic, but
it's over double what Microsoft's talking about on theirs.
Right, and that's just their standard uncompressed storage throughput.
Correct.
Like that's amazing, but it's just to me it's marketing numbers that they're separating intentionally, so that you don't actually have to put 5 gigabytes a second on their storage throughput for compressed, because technically the uncompressed version of the compressed data that you're putting through there is 8 to 9 gigabytes a second. So it's a marketing number. So it's not completely false. But the way that I see this is PlayStation might have soldered chips. If it doesn't, then it's got some sort of proprietary chip with a RAID installed on it that allows you to separate out amongst different NVMe controllers.
Yep.
For the first chunk here, the second chunk here, the third chunk here, the fourth chunk here, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, back and forth.
And again, as we talk about these tech specs, I think it's important to note that they specifically said, Mark Cerny himself, do not go and buy any proprietary hardware currently, because they will have a list that is available that will be compatible with PS5. Don't jump the gun, wait for the list, because you don't want to have yourself out because you decided to buy something beforehand.
Well, and if I recall correctly, that's supposed to be for the extra NVMe SSD slot that's available on the system, which actually, by the way, means that they're allowing some room for self-upgradability here, which
correct.
I think that's fantastic.
I agree entirely. I'm going to cut off the technical talk for a minute, only because we're running along on it, and I'm going to pull out a few quotes here from various people I found on Twitter, only because I think this is kind of interesting.
Realistically, that's all we needed to go through anyway. So
I will point out that I obviously love PlayStation. I care about platinum trophies, and I have a bias there. And that's known and documented pretty damn well in this podcast. Yeah. But John Lineman, I can't pronounce his name. It's Lineman. He is a writer and video guy for Digital Foundry. Tweeted out saying, the craziest thing about PS5 is the speed of the SSD. 5.5 gigabytes per second is just part of the story. There's a lot of custom silicon in there to ensure the system isn't bottlenecked in any other areas. It's really faster on paper, a lot faster than Xbox Series X even. Beyond that, I was surprised that it allows for off-the-shelf NVMe drives, but only if they are certified. There are no drives available today that are fast enough for the PS5, so do not buy them in preparation. So again, Digital Foundry actually released it. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, this delay is killing us. God.
I know.
that's what makes me think. Yeah, and that's why I haven't been talking as much, and I'm sorry. But the way that the way that they're talking about the memory storage is making me think that because of the way that they set this up, it was supposed to be completely fluid, completely open. You're not going to be hindered whatsoever. It's going to be like you could go in and out and do whatever you want and not have any dropping or like crashing or anything like that. They want you to have this beautiful fluid experience, which is great because that is something that it's kind of been a pain in the butt, especially with the original PS4 going to the PS4 Pro. I noticed that my quality of life went up pretty considerably going up to it.
Yeah.
Now, you haven't gone up to the Pro. You may not have really noticed it as much, but I did. So it's good to hear that they're staying in that pathway and doing what they're doing with it. But it's also they're keeping everything to a standard, saying it will not work unless you do it this way.
Yeah.
So they're at least they're keeping you from screwing it up the best they can.
Agreed. I have one other quote, which is from Kurt Margano. I should have, read these names before we started the show. He's the co-game director of The Last of Us Part 2. So he works at Naughty Dog. There's your disclaimer. He's part of Sony. Still tripping over the PS5's SSD spec. Like, people don't even know how big of a leap in terms of game design can be made, especially for first party that doesn't have to design for lowest common denominator. By far the biggest leap in my career. Can't wait. And then he added on the bottom, obligatory, no, I'm not hinting at anything Naughty Dog is working on, just speculating based on those numbers. So there's a couple of people, both game developers and, just tech gurus in general who are actually working in the industry, who are very excited about this SSD. I do think it's kind of a problem how Sony displayed it, only because of the fact that, like, while you compare these numbers on paper, we're again talking about 10.28 teraflops compared to 12, talking about 52 CUs over 36. Mark's even saying here, who is our technical guru here locally, that that's the better way to go. I am very curious to see what actually happens in the future. Granted, we're all quarantined and stuck inside right now, so I'm sure if Sony were to pull out something from their ass, they could actually probably generate some really cool video content to explain.
I'm wondering if, because of the way that they have the memory, they didn't need the processing cores that the Microsoft is going to need from not having this custom memory bank for them to pull from. And I'm wondering if that's why it's not as important for them to have what Microsoft has.
It'll be interesting because, Mark Cerny went on, and I mean on, about the fact that I love his name. I love Mark Cerny. Like, I want everyone to understand who's watching this podcast. I love that man. He's great. And when he got into nerd mode, I was in it. I was in it for the entire 53 minutes.
Totally with you.
But he went on and on about 825 being the perfect number for the hard drive there. But he also talked about the fact that they could possibly have expansion or even different SKUs. It definitely seemed to me like he was hinting at different SKUs with different storage levels.
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about the tech stuff, John, you and I get to talk about some of the other nerdy PlayStation stuff. Mark Cerny noted specifically on backwards compatibility. And when he talked about backwards compatibility, he talked about the two ways to go about it. You either include the chipset of the previous generation, so you find some way to make sure it runs on the current chipset, or you build it in so that everything is layered on top of one another. So it looks like PS4, PS4 Pro, PS5 are all running on the same architecture here. But do we really believe that's the end of backwards compatibility? Is that all we have available to us?
They were pretty straightforward when they were talking about backwards compatibility, the PS3 not really being a thing, and that they had to code in from a certain point where you were going to be able to go. Same reason for the issues that they had with the name changes, which is where I think a lot of it comes from, or at least a lot of the hindrances from you being able to go back and play certain games with a different username. So I think that it's more along the lines of, with a lot of the changes that have happened, that's where you get your restrictions from. But they fixed it at the PS4 level, or at least soon after the PS4's creations level, and they got what plan is going to be up until the PS5, and they said for us to do this we need to hit this marker, and that's why they have specific games where they say this is the point at which backwards compatibility is not going to cause any problems, regardless of name changes, regardless of any coding procedures or anything else that would be with future development.
So I think the only other thing I want to talk on is the fact that Xbox has, as we talked about literally on this show, backwards compatibility all the way up to the original Xbox. The original Xbox being somewhat limited, but 360 series, Xbox One X, Series X, all of it kind of going together. Not only backwards compatibility, but the actual Xbox Series X will not have its own exclusives because every game released within at least the first year is going to be available on Xbox One X. So do we really think that PlayStation's just going to give that over? Is there plans in the works, do you think? I mean, I personally believe that there has to be something going on for PS3 emulation, if not for PSP and Vita as well, only because there's such a large library that we're including these games in PS Plus, having that ability for people to play those games on PS5 and have a super large library at launch.
Oh, yeah. I would love this because the only problem that we have is that you have PlayStation Now. You can play a lot of the PlayStation 3 titles through PlayStation Now, and that was kind of like their workaround. Yeah, I know. And they got. I actually went and looked at the catalog, and it's not bad.
It's good.
Got a lot of decent games in it, but it's not like the best either.
It's not gangbusters, right?
I feel like if you're gonna. Yeah, like you've got your specific games that people are like the newer games that people are going to want to play, and some older games that aren't so old that people are still thinking I would play that right now. Oh, I can, and it's not going to cost me an extra dime, and that works out for them. But the when it comes to the Vita stuff, I think it's going to be one of those things that ends up getting it either has to be remastered specifically or it's going to die.
No. So here's my argument, right?
I'm sorry.
No. I think you're wrong because not every game. Go. Yeah, you can leave, sir. You're a fake fan. I'm going to remove this Monokuma. It's not you anymore. No, I mean
power.
I would wager if you were to take the entirety of games that required, not that do utilize, but required touchscreen on the back of the Vita, you would probably find 12. And I'm not kidding about that number. I am genuine about that because the touchscreen interface of the Vita games can be utilized on the touchpad of a PS4 controller. Right here, you can use this. No problem. I'm not playing Tearaway. They already ported it over here. That's fine. But every other, like Little Big Planet Vita, not going to work for backwards compatibility. Not the end of the world. But
do people want those games? Do people need those games?
Yes, I need them. I need them all.
I need them all.
I mean, you think about a lot of the Vita games that we really wanted have already been ported.
No, that's incorrect. Until this summer when they port over Ys Memories of Celceta, and then it'll be there.
They're working on making it to where Vita being gone isn't going to be a hindrance to anybody or anything. Well, it's sad,
dead console,
and I love the Vita, and it's unfortunately one of the solidifying things that tells me Vita 2 is never coming.
My point would be not necessarily that they should port over these games because people want them, but they've literally allowed users to develop a library of games. Like if you're a PlayStation Plus person who's been around since 2015, you've been putting all these games in your library. You have PS3, PS4, and Vita. Why not give them access to those games?
I agree. 100%. I mean, they're not doing anything for you, and you say it's dead, so let it go.
Let it go.
Hey, I'm saying there's another game being released here this summer, right?
We'll find out.
Brick Breakers, baby.
Brick Breaker. No, it's what is the name of it actually? Colin Moriarty is releasing a game. It's called
Silence.
I think it's Brick Breaker, isn't it?
No, it's Twin Breakers. That's what it is. Twin Breakers. Coming to Vita, PS4.
Twin Breakers. Yeah.
Yeah. So please let us know what you think about the specs. I do believe that Sony needs to come back out. We could have gone all day. I did not want to dive into the actual production of the show and what the direction they went, only because regardless of how you look at it, they marketed it wrong, but it was a GDC talk. Please let us know what you think about the actual specs of the PS4.
There's 10 million people that watched this, and there was at least 8 million of them that were disappointed.
No, I would argue there's probably 9.25 million that were disappointed. But let us know what you think about the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X specs in the comments, floating above Mark like an angry cloud because I keep saying above. So we're going to move rather quickly to our second topic of the show. We only have 2 this week, only because we kind of doubled up on PS5, Xbox Series X comparisons. But this is all about E3, and believe it or not, E3 is canceled because of the coronavirus, which is the very reason why we're doing the quarantine show.
Not even doing the online thing or anything.
Touchy.
Yeah, so what's really interesting here is that E3 has had a tumultuous run-up of 2020. So Sony once again decided they're not going to join. The creative director behind E3, which is actually a company, which I thought was kind of weird, is I Am 8-Bit. I Am 8-Bit is a wonderful company that does all kinds of compilations for various things. They actually helped make the Journey soundtrack come out along with the Flower and Transistor soundtracks. They're a very interesting company, and I believe E3 was trying to court them. The ESA is actually the company behind E3. To bring in more community involvement, but they backed out about, at this point in time, we've talked about it, 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago. So E3 is officially canceled because of the fact that they just cannot support the health regulations that are required to avoid the coronavirus with all this happening. Now, Microsoft, Nintendo, Ubisoft have all responded saying they're doing something specific around E3. EA is going to be doing something because of the fact that they are doing their own thing anyways the day before E3. Bethesda, and that's it, has not said anything. So, I mean, my big question here is this the end of it? Like, I feel like it's the end of it personally.
It depends on how well the online platforms do.
Okay.
So don't get me wrong, like the E3 live stream has always been a big deal, especially once that became a big thing, you know, like when E3 started broadcasting out the main stage events and everything else like that, you know, for everyone to be able to watch. That you know, definitely changed the game for them quite a bit, because the IRL attendance is what really matters to E3, not the online performances necessarily, the online live stream, that kind of thing of the events and whatnot happening around. Don't get me wrong, they have their own advertisers that go on there, but if I remember right, if I remember right, and from what I had heard, the way that the promotions happened for E3 and the way that they made money was from people actually showing up to, 1, attend the event, but 2, from the vendors showing up to try to display things at the event, because they kind of went at a premium for that. Not to mention advertisers and whatnot based on, you know, the revenue that they make, or the number of viewers that they get, the number of eyeballs they get on a live stream. So it's kind of a weird place for them to be in if they've hard canceled and not done a live stream to just rebroadcast what Microsoft's doing, or what, you know, Sony, well, not Sony, but Bethesda is doing, who, you know, whoever, that kind of thing, you know, is actually going to be broadcasting at E3. And one of the points that I think you had made before in a conversation that we had over, I guess, Marco Polo was, you know, how are they going to survive with money until next year? Well, maybe they can carry the funds from the last event into next year's event, that kind of thing, if they're smart with it.
Yeah.
But
so this is
the hard.
There's not going to be a next year. I'm sorry.
But the hard part's going to be, how do you get everyone to come back again if you get like Sony's already done it. So how do you do it? How do you continue if Microsoft and Bethesda and Capcom or Rockstar, whoever, you know, decides, I'm not coming back.
Make some crazy ass incentives.
No, yeah. So one of the things that I agree with you is that I think it's crazy, absolutely crazy. The ESA didn't say, "Hey, we're moving to an online platform where all these people can."
Well, actually,
I thought that was through us.
I thought that was one of the conversations they had, because I remember GDC and what was the other one? There were a couple
the
weeks.
BAFTAs, the GDC. There's been a couple conferences recently. PAX
but they
East actually did happen.
Well,
Yeah, ooh, nice shirt.
wearing
Nerd.
PAX East shirt. No, but there was a different conference that said that they were going to move to an online platform because we talked about it 2 weeks ago. GDC said they were going to move to an online platform.
GDC did for sure because they actually just had their awards, and Untitled Goose Game won Game of the Year at GDC. It's
Hell yeah! I didn't even know that. Hell yeah!
Yeah, congrats. I mean, I'm a big fan of the game.
They deserve
it's super dumb and great. Yeah,
they deserve it.
Yeah.
But I forget what other conference.
John, you
it
never
was.
played Untitled Goose Game. Don't even judge.
I forget what other game it was or other conference it was that said they were going to move to an online platform. But there were like 3 that
South by Southwest, maybe.
Maybe. I know one in particular that was the NVIDIA GPU conference.
Okay.
I know they said they were going to move to an online platform at one point, but there was one other bigger one. I'd have to look back through the show notes from the other episode, but I'll get there.
Regardless, right? Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it's absolutely ludicrous that they didn't decide to do something. Like, you don't have to charge them massive amounts of money to allow them to stream on your platform. Now, granted, I also think that John's right here, where these are publishers who are learning. Why bother? I mean, why spend the money if you don't have to?
Just go to an all online platform, and advertisers are going to be picked out based on region and pretty much through Google, and they're going to end up making more money anyway.
Nintendo Direct.
That's what we were talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, between that and the state of play, it's gonna blow out just the same way. And they're gonna be like, man, we saved a bunch of money, and we still got us just as much representation, and it's not even necessary. The problem that is that with the stuff that needs to be hands-on, there's gonna have to be something specific for that. So but how many times a year are you gonna do that? Is it gonna be a once-a-year event now?
No, because
between multiple of these things.
No, because the publishers can literally fly out developers. They can literally fly out journalists and be like, "Hey, we're located in LA. You're already used to this budget, so we're gonna go ahead and give you 5 games you can put your hands on." And not only is Ubisoft going to do this, but Capcom and WB, who, by the way, was supposed to have their first ever E3 conference this year where they would actually reveal a brand new Harry Potter game, a Batman game. Blows me away. But
yeah,
I mean, like,
everybody was ready for that Batman because all the damn teases.
But like they literally have these capabilities where they fly journalists out everywhere all the time. And I'm not joking when I mean all the time. I mean, we live in Charlotte. About 3.5 hours to the east of us is Raleigh, where there are 21 different video game studios. And I know Insomniac Games has flown out multiple journalists from IGN, Kotaku, and various people.
It's not even just game studios. It's also like technology studios. Like, I mean, Red Hat exists out there. Like,
It'll save you more money to pay for 3 days of these people being in a hotel room for one major release and their airfare than paying for E3.
Oh, 100%.
Hands down.
I mean, well, so I was just looking it up. The 2 big events that got postponed were Google Cloud Next.
Okay.
So everyone who uses Google Cloud or, like major companies that use Google Cloud would have shown up at the cloud platform. And then Adobe Summit for all of your creative platforms. So both of those got pushed to online platforms. But moving to an online platform, like from a production side, actually just coming from the production side, is a lot cheaper up front. The problem is the ability to present the information in a meaningful way is much more personal in person. So you get a much better retention rate from people who show up to events. I showed up for a game and tried out a trial for a game called Orb Rivals at PAX. And I actually have the card to download the beta for it, and I've downloaded the beta for it.
Proud of you.
But like from an online event, I wouldn't have gotten the same effect because I couldn't play the demo and participated with, the people at the venue and that kind of thing. Like,
So Here's the big thing: is that E3 specifically, if we're talking about this conference alone, was built around the fact that Space World existed first. And Space World, along with CES, are two conferences that were all about bringing journalists to come in and view product. It is all it's about. Now, E3 has had a personal standpoint for the past 2 to 3 years, I think, but it has not been a consumer conference.
Right.
Which is why I truly believe that E3 will disappear, but these publishers are going to be just fine because they're just going to use this June timeframe as a whole to release a bunch of fucking news.
They'll call it E3 week. Except
totally
E3 won't exist anymore.
Them having a online event.
Yeah.
I totally see them having an online event and totally putting out betas, getting people excited. You're going to see a lot more trailers, and even having even if they had to, having a smaller live thing that was pre-taped to get people hyped up for it and get like that same emotion going. It would still be a lot more cost effective for them.
Yeah.
Well, I also think
100%.
you're going to get a lot of other studios who may not be high in English speakers, right? So E3 has been interesting because it's always been held here in California. It's always been held from an American standpoint in either LA or I think for 1 year Sacramento. I could be wrong. But for the most part, it's basically here in the United States, which means it's an English speaking conference. So I think if you could do these pre-recorded tapes where you're able to have something going on, Capcom can easily release a 13-minute video on what they're working on.
In
Square
whatever
Enix can
languages
release
they
their
wanted
video.
to.
Exactly, right? And so it's easy to translate. It's easy to move on. Like, I think these companies are going to have a boon from the fact that they no longer have to give a fuck about the actual schedule of this. I'm going to move away from the camera for like a minute and a half. I'll be right back.
I just want to point out that if you look at the background of me and Brent right now, like, it just looks so plain Jane. It just makes me love how much work we put into this set.
See this
even more.
This is why
like, it just is so beautiful.
See, this is why I wanted to record from the set, was to be able to give you guys the ability to not have to worry about your backgrounds and still be able to show your wonderful faces, here and all the way over there. I can't reach that far, but
We're gonna look like Zordon from Power Rangers sitting in those seats.
that's kind of the point. But you, what do you think about E3 surviving at that, like in an online platform? I don't think they have a place here because, so here's the hard reality of a lot of things whenever it comes to us so from the Strange Productions side of things, like the fact that we've done like a Rocket League event, a Call of Duty event, and whatever else, that kind of thing. We have other events that we're looking to run. Is that generally these events don't make money. Generally, they don't. The production side does.
Yeah.
And the
what they're there for is, again, for the advertisement. It's for the getting the name out there. You get more out of it than you will making the money for the actual event every time. If anything, I think the guy selling the food in the shop is making more money than you are.
Oh, so food sales is actually usually the profit aspect of events like PAX or E3, that kind of thing. Like, they don't generally make money off of the people coming in or the vendors that come in. Like, E3 can probably advertise themselves well enough because they have such an established name whenever it comes to showing off, like the number of people they've got showing off every year and that kind of thing. But the problem is that if an online platform proves itself viable this year, well, that kind of ruins their entire shtick. Like, what do they have to gain from this anymore? Like, in my opinion, like...
Well, and that's where I think the online is going to make it more relevant, because I think this is opening up the eyes of not only us, but to the people who would be a part of it to make E3 what it is, realize exactly how... oh, poor girl. And exactly how antiquated this really is, and how they can make it better for the time of today.
She looks so awkward.
And I think they really need to focus on this and not ignore it, because you have journalists that have been talking about E3 being antiquated for a very long time now, and they haven't been listening, and this shows how fragile it really is.
Well, so here's the thing, though, is that I still think IRL events have a place. Like, so DreamHack, for example, does a fantastic job I think, of giving you the engagement as well as giving you the events to go through. Like, so for example...
But we're not talking about DreamHack. We're talking about E3.
But that's the thing. They fall in the same kind of category of IRL events. The difference is that DreamHack runs gaming tournaments that you would not be able to see anywhere else.
So I would argue that
Super PC based.
Yeah, not even just PC based. I would argue that there's a time and place for everything, right? So PAX organizers, they go through this entire thing where they spend a ton of money. People do pay them, but it is based off of the actual attendance, and they have actually grown themselves to be known as a community event for the past 10 years, roughly, maybe more. And DreamHack's the same way. E3 has not been that. So the fact that they are going to lose out, like, don't get me wrong, I love E3. I love the hype. We have done recordings of reactions and videos on this channel. John and I have watched E3 together for years at this point. I don't want it to go away, but to think that it's going to last, I think, is kind of not. It's silly. Yeah. It's okay. It's fine. Life changes, times change, all that stuff. So not the end of the world. You gotta
change with the times. You gotta change with the flow. That's what I'm saying. Like, don't ignore this point. Yeah, it's sad. Like, watching GameStop closing is going to be sad in a lot of perspectives.
Well, that's why they're working really hard to keep themselves relevant.
It's just the time of changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that boy.
There's a good boy.
Here's Einstein.
See, I do like the quarantine edition because I get to play with my dogs while I record. Einstein. He's like, please let me go.
Yeah, he likes the attention. He's the star of the family.
He's the one who cries out if you're giving Snow way too much attention.
Do you think E3 is going to last? No, not at all. Not even a little bit. But please let us know what you think about E3 and whether it will last another year without the funding of this year in the comments floating above John. Why John? I don't know. Because floating above John. But I think it's finally time for last call.
Wait. Bellboy!
Last call!
We're going to Bellboy.
Bellboy!
That... Hold on.
God damn it! He gets paid for one thing.
Oh,
he doesn't.
No,
get paid,
here, stop it.
Honest.
Here he comes.
Don't. I love that we're making our audience wait patiently.
It says we're in quarantine, Mark. Bellboy.
They're not even here.
What do you mean?
I think it's time.
I don't see him.
I am Zordon of the Power Rangers. I am right next to you.
And now I think it's time for last call.
Last call!
He fucked up the bell ringing, but that's fine. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Yep.
Of course, we have our cheers. Normally, we would have a special guest that we would all share, but of course, we are quarantined. So we did bring you our lovely St. Patrick's Day brews that we're having. I've got Guinness and a Jameson here. I believe Mark has the cold brew.
I have the Jameson Cold Brew, yes.
Yeah, and then John has the
Jameson Black Barrel.
Black Barrel. That is true. Please feel free to join us on our Discord where you can talk. Oldie but a goodie. You talk to us on Discord. We have over 157 people as of last viewing, though it might be higher at this point. And then, of course, you can check out Strange Garage. I don't know how many events Strange Garage will be doing in the next future. But
so, fun fact, I found out today, actually here within the last 2 hours, that the next race that we're supposed to have in the coming weekend.
Canceled.
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
The county that we were supposed to race in, Burke County, around Morganton, North Carolina, where we were going to race, flat out said, nope, you cannot have a gathering more than 100 people. So they tried to move it to South Carolina, but then the county in South Carolina where they wanted to move it to said, nope, can't have a gathering of more than 100 people. So the coming race has been canceled, but they were very, honestly, I'm more impressed that they were very resilient to trying to get us a race this weekend, but isn't going to happen. Last race did happen very well. I'm trying to get the footage from Russell and Kelly to get something together for that. So we'll see.
Well, you know, hopefully one day we'll get more coverage for them. It almost feels like this channel is pushing out more content than Strange Garage. Just putting it out there. Anyways, moving on. Of course, we have some weekly reading.
Not wrong.
In the weekly reading, I actually posted.
We are dedicated, sir.
Corona edition. I actually put in an article where you can virtually tour 500 museums and 18 galleries. So this is a Lifehacker article. It's actually really, really cool if you're feeling a little claustrophobic and you want to get some different perspective on the world.
But they still can't virtually tour E3.
Oh, shucks.
SmackDown!
The weekly deal this week is actually something the Dispatcher would probably really enjoy, which is a nice humble bundle called Just Drive. Now, for Just Drive, you have access to...
I was expecting just the tip.
That would be really funny. You have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 racing games, I believe, for a total of $13 as the max. That includes NASCAR Heat 4, Project Cars 2, and Assetto Corsa. Now, Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, and the original Project Cars all three have actual expansion packs, all available in this. Again, $13 nets you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 racing games, along with expansions for Project Cars 2s, and Assetto Corsa. And all of this goes towards a wonderful charity, which is Child's Play Charity. If you would like to support this, they are wonderful. You can also choose to not support them. If you hate children, that's fine. I have nothing against you. Actually, I do. Why you hate children? Come on. Nonetheless...
Why do you think old people carry canes?
From a racing perspective, I support this entirely. Buy it.
I had a feeling you would. And finally, of course, we have some cool shit. It looks like there is a library created in Minecraft because there are various countries that suppress different books. So librarians gathered together along with some gamers to create a Minecraft library you can go and look at, which I thought was super cool.
That's awesome.
On top of the fact that
is amazing.
Absolutely amazing. This is why the digital age is so fascinating. It's because even you have repressive regimes, you can do what you want. On top of that, a Japanese school canceled the graduation, and so the students held their graduation in Minecraft. That's right, folks. That's where you need to be. Just be in Minecraft.
Get it.
You're good.
You guys know what's up.
And so finally, for our question of the week, is, how do you plan to use your quarantine time? Because let's argue here that maybe you still have to go to work. You still have to work your 8 to 9 hours, but you're not socializing. You're not leaving the house. You're not going out to see people. So how are you going to use your quarantine time?
So unfortunately, like, work time for people that differentiates between the three of us a little bit. So,
of course.
I mean, me personally, I'm a work from home person, so it doesn't quite affect me quite as much. Although, Brent, as I had told you, I guess as you had made a quick stop here to drop some things off, that it's been kind of interesting because I haven't quite set foot in the office like I was supposed to in a while, which has been great.
Yeah.
But like as far as quarantine time, especially now that the race has been canceled this coming weekend, I mean, like that gives me an entire day to spend developing things for production purposes that we were looking to use.
That's cool.
So, like bracket systems and automation for series information and whatnot, for overlays and whatnot. That's stuff that we've been wanting to build in. So that's something I'm trying to build out for us, you know, like to use from a production perspective. Like if you guys didn't see the Queen City Rocket League Invitational from CLT Esports and 54 Sports, I recommend you try to check out CLT Esports Twitch channel and take a look at it. Strange Productions ran that from beginning to end, and we did a fantastic job, but we have some other things we want to do, so my quarantine time's going to spend doing that.
Okay. That's a good use of your quarantine time. How about you, Mr. Pettit?
Well, it looks like I'm on the other spectrum where I have to actually keep working. I can't work from home. Unfortunately, I'm more of the manual labor type. I tend to fix things in the field, so I just don't get the same amount of quarantine time as everybody else. But coming up here soon, it looks like we're not going to have too much of a choice. We're going to have some kind of time off, and I'll probably end up just fixing the house up, man. Getting some of that yard work caught up and cleaning up the house, getting that spring cleaning underway. The pollen's out like crazy right now, so the car needs a wash. There's a lot of stuff to do, man.
Yeah, I'm super pissed. I bought children's Flonase instead of regular Flonase.
Why did you get children's Flonase?
I was in a rush. We're in a quarantine zone. I need to get out of the store as fast as possible.
I feel like the easy answer to that to get you out of it would have been they were out of stock. Oh, I get that. Totally. No.
Probably. I don't know. So I plan on doing some of the same. I've got an entire backyard of my new home, as you can see my home office here, that I have to rake and bag, which I'll probably do this weekend. I also plan on potting some flowers. And then after that, I have a twofold plan here, right? So I'm going to be learning some Angular, which is a programming language for the non-nerds. And then I'm going to be playing some video games. I will, trust me. I plan on also diving into some video games. As a matter of fact, currently on the PlayStation Store, there is a nice March sale going on where various games are on sale. So Outer Wilds is on sale. I bought that. Donut Country's on sale. I bought that. I'm also working through Final Fantasy VIII, and John and I are also playing through Division 2 DLC together. So I've got a lot to preoccupy my time. I need to be more active, according to the Fitbit, because I'm not walking as much. But please let us know what you're going to do with your quarantine time in the comment section floating above me. Whoa!
Below!
Like a corgi on the clouds.
For the love of God, wash your hands. Don't be an asshole.
Thank you very much. And please stay away. Just stay home. It's fine.
Social distancing.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. Don't get me wrong. We would all of us much rather be doing things other than staying in our house.
We would rather be doing this podcast with each other
together.
Here.
Correct.
Together.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, we're taking precautions because it's not about you getting sick. It's about you spreading the sickness to people who can be. So do not be selfish. Please stay at home. Wash your hands. Make sure you're not touching your face. And as always, cheers.
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 What a great episode.